purpose of all of this stimulus money is to keep Americans employed, to keep businesses afloat. If the businesses stay afloat, they keep Americans employed. So that's kind of how it works. So the focus of pretty much all of this stimulus money is to keep Americans employed.
So on the EIDL, tell us about that. People, who can apply?
Sure.
What's going on with it? What's happening?
Sure. So the EIDL plan.
I want you to get into some detail here.
Okay, great. So it's an online application. If you are a small business, meaning under 500 employees, then you can apply through the SBA. This loan is an SBA loan. It's directly through the SBA. It's underwritten and funded by the United States Treasury Department. So the loan has some favorable terms. It's got a low interest rate of 3.75%. The term of payback can be up to 30 years. And again, the focus is that this loan will be used for payroll, related payroll taxes. There's a little bit of window to be used for mortgage interest, meaning if the business has mortgage, and also some for rent and utilities. So again, it is not meant for capital improvements, nor is it meant to be used to refinance any pre-existing debt.
And so who gets into that? If you own rental properties, you own a business, that qualifies with the employees. I mean, it's all, all those people are able to get in there?
Correct. It's actually available to sole proprietors, independent contractors, people who operate as LLCs, partnerships, corporations, whether they're a C corporation or an S corporation. So even folks without employees. And you said, but Lynn, you just said payroll. Well, if I'm self-employed, my payroll is my net pay. That's what I live off of. So that is going to be deemed your payroll. So even folks who are independent contractors and self-employed folks, they are going to be eligible for this plan.
And part of it is, as you and I have been getting into this with the team, is that, it's easy enough to fill out an application, but then what really happens, especially with the SBA, is you get a case manager, and that person is your friend or your foe, depending on what's going on, because as you were saying, Lynn, you don't get to pick a number on what you want.
Correct.
It is, you got to make sure your package is airtight, looks good, and be ready to supply the information as you're getting more funds. How would you add on to that?
Yeah, and also it's not like you're applying for a specific loan amount. Like you said, 100,000, 200,000, it goes up to $2 million. But they're going to ask some basic information on the initial application, and that's what's going to actually get you in line. And that's really key, is to getting in line quickly and getting your position to get some of that money, because the reality is, I think this program is going to be a lot bigger as far in terms of requests than they could have ever possibly imagined. There are just so many people being impacted in a not a good way, that they're going to be reaching out for some assistance. So the program is structured in 2 steps, so that you get approved for a loan, and that will be decided by the case manager. They're going to release this in $25,000 increments. So when you do get that first $25,000, you have to make real sure that you have kept accurate records on how you have spent this money. Because until you can justify how you've spent the first installment, if you will, of the loan, you won't get a second one if you can't show that you've used it on appropriate expenses.
Right. And Lynn, I'm just going to look, we got a bunch of questions coming in here, so keep them coming. But if somebody owns different companies, do they have to apply for each company individually? Correct. Or one app? Yeah.
No, they'll apply. Think of it in terms of each business that has a federal ID number.
And quick question, because I want to clarify, we're discussing the EIDL program right now, not PPP. We're going to get to that in a second. This is EIDL you're talking about.
That is correct.
Right. Okay. Go on.
So think about it in terms of a federal ID number. I own a corporation and my spouse owns a corporation, or one of us is self-employed, one will use their social security number, the other one will use the federal ID number of, the business that they're applying for. So yeah, if you own rental property, you're a landlord, whether it's commercial rental or residential rental, that qualifies as a business.
Okay. What is the total funding SBA has allocated to the EIDL loan?
Well, the whole package was $2 trillion. But when you start to do the math on the different pieces, all the different components that are out there, and the levels that we hear people are applying at, I don't know how far.
Well, this is just for the loan, for the EIDL loan. How much can you get?
Sure, it's up to $2 million under the EIDL loan.
Okay, and that's based on your package and needs, and you said that the SBA has given some guidance that maybe forecasting on how bad it may get for your business could help your situation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but that's after you're with a case manager. So for example, things are happening so quickly with regard to just the way things are going that you may apply. It's going to take 2-3 weeks to hear from a case manager, and things could change rapidly in that period of time. So being able to adequately communicate that to the case manager is really going to be quite important to the applicant's case.
Do foreign-owned businesses have the same eligibility as companies with U.S. ownership?
These have to be U.S.-based companies.
For
US
foreign-owned business, I'm reading this question. So this is both for EIDL and PPP?
As far as I'm aware of, this is for U.S.-owned companies, because I even saw something in one of the applications where, now I didn't read it as a rule, but it sounded more like it was a heavy suggestion that when the money is granted, any approved expenses, they prefer it to be spent on U.S. sourced purchases.
Is that including Puerto Rico?
Didn't specify. We'd have to wait for further guidance.
Okay.
But I would imagine any U.S. territories as well would qualify.
Okay. Yeah, because someone's here going into a bit of detail on U.S. legal entities, but majority ownership foreign. So would be spent on U.S. payroll.
Again, we have to wait for some further guidance on that.
Right.
They really have not specified. They've said U.S. owned companies and haven't really provided any additional detail on that yet.
Right. So yeah, and this is where, as these questions get deep like that, this is where it kind of helps to get one-on-one, and again, we have a complimentary, assessment we're happy to do. As folks are asking more detailed questions, get with a team. We'll get you one-on-one with the experts. And we've got the attorneys here too that understand the legal structure, so we could help. Here's a question. A lot of people are applying for EIDL loan just to get 10K grant and do not intend to follow through with the entire process. In this case, would they have to pay back the 10K or still forgiven?
There's no definitive answer on that. I've heard answers on both sides. I've heard a lot of people applying for the same strategy. Again, that part hasn't been disclosed in any of the application or loan documents that are out.
Right, so they're kind of leaving it open-ended.
Or they haven't decided yet.
Yeah, it says the SBA.gov website describes EIDL as up to 10K.
Correct.
But so why are we describing different figures for that loan?
I don't know.
Or is this a different program from PPP? So maybe you just clarify that.
Oh yeah, the EIDL program is definitely different from PPP. It's a completely different program. So this might be a good transition to go into PPP. So EIDL is, again, applied for directly with the SBA. The Paycheck Protection Program, although it's backed by the SBA, the application process there will go directly to an SBA lender, which is a local bank that's approved to do SBA loans.
Okay. So yeah, and so the question comes up is why clients go directly to to banks, you know. And again, you and I were discussing this today. You know, we've been on the phone with bankers, and what's happening is that you know, Chase Bank, for instance, last night said we're not giving out any money because we need more guidance. But these bankers are overwhelmed, and right now, you know, some bankers have, you know, 7,000 and 8,000 applications already in, you know, packages, financials in from their A-list clients that that are going to get, you know, the A-list treatment. So they're going to be first in line, and these bankers are saying that, you know, this is as many loans as we get in 4 years. So no question about it, the bankers are going to be overwhelmed. They're going to pick and choose on who they're helping, and we're working very diligently on some channels for people who maybe don't have a great relationship with a banker, but working on some channels to get access to SBA approved lenders. And Lynn, you've been doing some homework on that. And so on the EIDL program, you said the cap on that is 2 million,
That is correct.
but it's what's up to 10,000. What's the difference between
Okay.
10,000 and 2 million with the EIDL?
Okay, the 10,000, the up to 10,000 is the grant component of the EIDL loan. So again, there's where the two parts is. The first 10,000 that comes out, as long as it's spent on approved expenses, it doesn't have to be forgiven because it's a grant. There's nothing to forgive. But even if you're not approved for the loan, you don't have to pay it back. It's a grant.
Okay.
Okay. With the PPP program, again, part of that can be forgiven as well, because here's what has to happen. The loan has to be spent on payroll and payroll related costs, and it's really for a period. What you're doing is you're taking your average payroll right before this disaster, and it's basically 2.5 times what that payroll is. That's what your loan amount is. So if you had a $10,000 payroll, you can apply for 25,000 over here. If it was $1 million, you know, then you can apply up to 10 million. So that would be 2.5 million. You know, you can apply up to 10 million. However, here's the key. That money, in order to be forgiven, has to be spent within the first 8 weeks, right after the loan is issued.
Okay.
Okay. So again, it's going to really come into play. And this is why people have to be careful if they're applying on both sides, because you can't use the same expenses as covered under both programs, because then you'd be double dipping. So basically what happens is if you get a PPP loan and you do spend it on the required expenses, the amount that's forgiven actually becomes income. You say, well, wait, you're forgiving it. How can it be income? Well, think about it. When you report the expenses, those are a deduction. So those got paid for you. They got paid for you by the PPP loan. So that'll come in as income. They'll wash each other out on your financial statements so that you're not taking a deduction for something you didn't actually pay. That was free money supported by the PPP program.
Okay.
But now anything outside of that 8-week period or not spent on appropriate expenses will become a loan. And that loan would then have to be paid back over a period of time.
And what did you say the recent change you saw today or yesterday about rates being lowered?
Yeah,
What was that in regard to?
the PPP originally came out at 4%. Then it dropped to 0.5%. And as of this morning, it's at 1%.
It went back up to 1%.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
All right. We'll see if it sticks there. What about a lot of questions we're getting earlier were about, employees letting, should people be letting employees go or not? How does that play into all of this?
okay. So again, the whole premise is to keep Americans working. So if you are going to apply for one of these loan programs and use that money for payroll, you've got to bring those employees back, because let's say you have a 50% reduction in payroll, you let half your workforce go. Well, you can't use the full size of the workforce and use that to apply for the loan and then only pay half as many people. What's going to end up happening is whatever money you get under the program, they're going to only allow half of it to be forgiven. So you have to be careful of the numbers, and you can't play the game. Well, let's say I had 30 people, so I let 15 go, and I'll just double the salaries of the 15 I got left, so my dollars are the same. No, you have to maintain a steady workforce. They may not be the same 30 people, but they still have to be the same number of people. Your workforce has to remain steady.
Got it. Okay. I'm going to tick off questions here. What if we have multiple business LLCs? How do you treat those?
Okay, again, it's going to go by your ID number. So if you've got multiple businesses, you're going to do multiple loans.
Okay. Okay.
Benefit programs, whatever's out there. It's going to be on a business by business case.
Okay. If a spouse who's not currently employed, can they get a stimulus package or unemployment?
If the spouse was not otherwise employed prior to this, I do not believe that the spouse will qualify for unemployment.
Got it. Okay. How is it determined that the loan is applied to payroll? Did you already answer that one?
Well, payroll is payroll. I mean, you've got to document, payroll has to be reported. It's going to be reported like payroll was before, on payroll tax forms 941, state unemployment reports. It's going to be treated the same way. The only thing that's going to be different for purposes of reporting for the loan purposes is what falls in the qualified period. And it's going to be a little bit different if they are self-employed or subcontractors. And I have no idea what the reporting is going to be like for that, because nothing's been released on how we're going to report that. I do know it is going to be based upon, what their net profits were before and what their net profits are now.
Okay. And how would you forecast lost real estate income? Use 2019 income, or then how would you support your payback ability?
Yeah, you would base it upon your 29 income, and it's going to be a projection of rents. The landlord is going to know who is and who isn't paying their rent, and so whatever rents are, they're experiencing a decrease in rent. They're going to just be able to forecast that out, and that's the amount of lost revenue that basically falls down to the bottom line, and that's what they're going to use for purposes of the application. It's just like a self-employed person is. The rent is income, and how that flows down, and the same way for a self-employed person, how that flows down to their net.
Okay. What if someone is the only person running the LLC, doesn't draw a weekly or monthly salary? How do they get to a salary since they're not making any money right now?
Okay, so again, it goes back to how they're taxed. If they're a single member LLC and they're being taxed as a disregarded entity, that puts them back to being self-employed.
Okay.
If they're a single member LLC and they're being taxed as a corporation, then it's gonna fall back to, again, compensation.
Okay.
Now, if they were making money before, and not taking reasonable compensation, that's a whole can of worms that they really need to be coached on.
Okay. So would idle be better so that this person could still pay payroll and yourself as a sole prop?
Yeah, again, self-employed people are eligible to apply, so yes.
Okay. Um, uh, do you know for PPP, when does your 8 weeks start?
From what I have been told, the 8 weeks starts when the loan is originated.
Originated, which what is I mean, I don't want to drill down too far. I know you're trying to figure it out, but when originated, I mean you get approval of the loan docs or something?
Pretty much, yeah,
Around there. Okay.
because remember, the banks are doing this. So when the bank originates the loan, they're ready to close. I mean, it's usually closed and funded within a 24-hour period, if not right on the spot.
Okay. How do you calculate FTE for PPP forgiveness formula? Is that too complicated?
It is that, yeah,
Right.
I just, that goes back to, when we were calculating for health insurance benefits, how they had to calculate full-time equivalent workers. They're going to use the same formulas, and there's no way to answer that question on this
Right.
call.
Right. Okay. What about someone who just purchased a business and has a high business loan monthly payment? Any help to ensure that that payment can continue to be made? Loan was carried by the seller?
Yeah, the legislation that is out right now regarding the loans talks about mortgage interest, and it does talk about pre-existing debt.
Okay.
No further definition has been provided.
Got it. Okay. So more to come. If the business location was forced to close, so all the 1099 employees are furloughed until the shop reopens, can they still pay them with PPP for the 2 months?
They can pay them. I don't know about the shop being closed, and here's where we're gonna need further guidance. How do you keep a shop open right now when people are under stay-at-home restrictions?
Right. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need
It's
further guidance. They haven't answered that question.
right. Good point. Good point. Yeah. It's insane. It doesn't make sense. Um, uh, if the business is paying independent contractors instead of employees, will that work for the PPP loan?
The PPP is designed for payroll. So I don't think PPP is gonna work for payroll.
Okay.
Because they're talking about employee compensation. It uses the term employee compensation. Now, when we talk about EIDL, EIDL goes into a little bit more and talks about independent contractors. So payments made to both salaried, hourly employees, people who are receiving W-2 compensation, and independent contractors. Whereas in PPP, I read compensation. I read wages.
Okay.
So maybe that's a point they will further define. As of right now, they're using broad terms without a lot of deep definition into terms.
What about small residential multifamily rentals owned free and clear when tenants stop paying rent? What's the
Sure.
category for
Yeah.
that?
Yeah. So again, if you are an owner of a residential rental, a commercial rental, I don't care if it's one unit or a shopping plaza or a skyscraper, There is no difference. What will be different is obviously how much you'll qualify for under the program, because it's going to be economies of scale. But again, a renter, even with one rental unit, they're going to still have an economic impact. They're just obviously going to be potentially awarded a smaller amount than someone who's renting out a skyscraper where 3/4 of the people stop paying their rent.
Right.
It's going to be economies of scale.
On idle, would the interest for a building loan payment be a valid expense if it far exceeds payroll to my 1 or 2 employees?
In the approved expenses say mortgage interest. It doesn't talk about the size of the loan. It says mortgage interest payments.
Okay. So with that scenario, they could be in the ball game. Just, we'll see. Lynn, so yeah, so people are saying they filled out the idle forms waiting to be signed by a case manager. How long does it take to hear from anyone? And so, how do you want to answer that?
Well,
we've seen different things. Yeah.
The paperwork says 3 days. There are 3 days to get the word on the $10,000 grant and 2 to 3 weeks to get assigned a case manager. I know folks who have had their application in now almost 10 days and haven't received the grant yet.
Right.
So if it's taking longer to get the grant, is it going to take longer to get a case manager? Again, remember, these are folks just like you and I that are trying to handle the workload, and someone just opened up the floodgates.
Right.
And they can just only handle so much in the course of a given day.
Yeah. And then someone's asking about this, supporting documentation needed for, well, first of all, it says, will idle be through a bank or direct on SBA website? So you answered that earlier. Maybe it's idles through the SBA.
Correct.
But the supporting documentation is where we stress with people, that's a key. So we've developed a proprietary checklist and worksheet based on guidance from the SBA and Lynn's expertise on what is going to be required. So we have that checklist, but how would you answer that? How much supporting documentation, are you recommending people keep?
Well, initially, on the initial application, they really only need to know a couple of numbers, but they need to be prepared that as soon as that case manager asks for that backup documentation. So what could that be? It could be up to 3 years worth of business tax returns, 3 years worth of personal tax returns, because under the EIDL program, any loan amount over $200,000 is going to require a personal guarantee from any owner, shareholder, partner, or managing member of an LLC who owns a 20% interest or more.
So that's a huge point. And I'm glad you brought it up, because you start getting into the personal guarantee realm, and you just, this gets back to the point where this is going beyond just filling out a loan application. You've got to have a high level discussion about what makes sense for you, what are the alternatives, and consider everything. The rules on relaxed loans from your 401k, waiving penalties on withdrawals from your IRAs, those are on the table. And, because many of the calls we've seen from people that we deal with have been, they're fearing liability related to personal guarantees because their businesses have shut down. They've got cash on hand for 90 days. Then they're going BK and they've signed, $3 million of a personal guarantee. We see this a lot in the franchise world where, a lot of them expand and require that personal guarantee. So this is a key point, because this gets into liability and understanding how to guard yourself. If you need the loan and you're required to do a personal guarantee, okay, just, make sure that you've got the right team advising on all the pieces.
Yeah, and Paul, just the other thing too, I know we talk about a lot of different things, and just in case people came in or out during the call, we use some short nicknames here like IDLE and PPP, and just it makes it easier to talk about the different programs without spelling out what the full name of the program is. But the IDLE loan that we've been talking about, that is the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. And PPP is referred to as the Paycheck Protection Program. So again, just to kind of bring folks up to speed when we use the nicknames of the programs.
Yeah, because we're getting called out for no more acronyms. I get it. Thanks for the reminder. And someone's asking, how do we access the worksheet? So I will be sending you a link to the worksheet as a follow-up to this. So I'll send an email out with some things, resources, so you can look at that. And then Lynn, if I'm an LLC, question recognizes in California as an S Corp, no employees, and I'm the only person working the business, and I have to pay for supplies, distribution, independent contractors, manufacturing, warehouses, etc. Can I arrive at something concrete with the employee, disaster loan or the PPP Paycheck Protection Plan?
Okay, so here's a key point. First of all, LLC by itself, although it's a legal designation, LLC by itself does not have a tax designation. It's the only form of legal entity that does not carry its own tax classification.
Because you could be anything. You could be an S, a C, or you could pick it.
Correct. But by default, a single member LLC is a sole proprietor. They can elect to be taxed as something else. By default, 2 or more members in an LLC is by default a partnership. However, they can elect to be taxed as something else, a C Corp, an S Corp. So I just want to make that point clear. So now, single member LLC, they said they have no employees.
No employees.
I would have to disagree with that statement, because if they are an S corporation and they are making money, the regulations say they must be receiving reasonable compensation. And this is a point where I suspect, as well as many of my colleagues, the people who should have been taking reasonable compensation but weren't are going to have a problem now under these programs.
Okay. So what's going to happen? Is this then how you massage the relationship with the case manager?
You can try, if you can show immediate compliance, that you've determined what reasonable compensation is and you're now compliant with the regulations. We have to wait for some guidance, but we could certainly try that avenue.
Okay. Yeah, which gets into the art form of dealing about these things. Someone's asking about operating expenses. There's no real detail in the question, but anything there?
Other than, and I could just, kind of go from what it says. They're talking about it, under the EIDL program, it can be for fixed existing debts, accounts payable, payroll, medical leave, sick leave, salaries, health benefits, mortgage payments, rent, utilities, insurance, and existing debt that cannot be paid because of the impact of COVID-19. So for example, let's say somebody is in the pharmaceutical business and their business is booming right now because of COVID-19. If they don't have a negative economic impact, they're going to have a real problem justifying why they need assistance.
Okay. Okay. And then someone's asking for clarification on a two-step program we mentioned. I don't remember that, but is the grant the first step and the second is the $25,000 loans? Do you remember?
Okay, so yes, it's not two separate programs. It is one program done in stages. So it is a loan program through the SBA. The initial impact or injection of cash out to the applicant is the $10,000, up to $10,000 grant. Then comes the case manager and approval process. You get approved based upon whatever they determine, whatever the loan amount is, but you will not receive the full loan amount. You will receive it in $25,000 installments. You'll get money. You'll have to prove how you spent the expenses. Then you'll get more money. You prove how you spent that money, you'll get more up to the cap of the loan, whatever you were approved for.
Okay. So yeah, they're not just throwing money at your feet willy-nilly. You're going to have to prove it. But the so when you apply for that disaster loan, EIDL, do they grant you the 10, they determine whether you can get up to 10,000. So it's not automatically that they're just going to give you 10 grand. They may give you 1,000 or 2,000 or $500. Clarify that. And then is that before you even talk to a case manager? They're
Yes,
going to give you.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And that initial amount could potentially be based upon the basic financial information that they ask on the question.
Which is nothing. When you fill out the questionnaire, it's filling out a bubblegum wrapper.
Yeah, it's a couple of questions, that's it. But again, if you're showing that, your income is significantly more than your expenses, and you don't have, there's no room to go in there, you might not get very much at all. But if the way around, you more than likely could be approved for the 10,000. But
Okay.
if they're saying up to, because they want to allow themselves, meaning the SBA, they want to allow themselves leeway for approval process. They're not just going to put it out and say, we're giving everyone 10,000.
Got it. Okay. And you might get nothing. You might get zero or you apply.
Correct.
Okay. So if all my employees are 1099 and the shop has closed and they are not working, they should apply for unemployment from the state, and I shouldn't try to pay them from either the Paycheck Protection Plan or the disaster loan. Yes or no? Or tough to answer?
That's a kind of a loaded question, because by definition, people who are paid on a 1099 are not employees. They are subcontractors. So if they are subcontractors, truly subcontractors, they can apply themselves. But if they're truly employees that have been disguised as subcontractors because someone thought the process was easier, cheaper, whatever, again, now we're opening another whole box of dynamite.
Right. Okay. And the follow-up question is, can I use payment protection plan for rent and utilities in that case, or employee disaster loan?
They're going to put a limit on rent and utilities. PPP program is where they just came out and changed the percentages. So they want 75% of that period of money going to payroll and only 25% going to these other approved expenses in order for it to be forgiven. Now, anything that falls outside those parameters, you still have the funds, but now it's a loan that has to be paid back.
Okay. Can you have both the disaster loan and the payment protection plan loan application submitted and then refi the disaster loan into the payment protection plan?
No. You can apply for both programs. You just cannot use the same expenses for both programs. And one program cannot be used to refi either the other one or previous SBA arrangement that you may already be in. There are some people out there that have some of the 6% SBA loans. They cannot use this money to refi those programs. Cannot.
Okay. Okay. All right. Yeah, somebody's saying that, we made the comment that, banks will be helping their A-list customers. Conjecture on our part, I stands to reason. We're hearing that from bankers. They got to take care of their own. The concern is that delays applications. And, are there other options for applying for the payment protection plan?
No.
Got to go through a bank. And yeah, we're just, we're working very hard on developing channels with our relationships, where anybody that we're helping who doesn't have a banking relationship, or maybe, put on the, if they want to apply, they're going to be put on the list down low, we can help them out. We're looking at all angles. And then a couple last questions here. Can the payment protection plan pay for rent in April and May, and the disaster loan for rent in June and July?
I know where they're going. They're going with the 8-week period. I have not seen anything that would prevent that from happening.
Okay. Okay. So to be determined, really.
Yeah, I mean, if you read the information that's available right now, there's nothing that would prevent that strategy. Those are two different expenses happening at different time periods. So.
Okay. Okay. And then, what amounts don't need repayment under both of these programs, disaster loan and payment protection plan? Is it still a gray area a little bit there? They're giving themselves some wiggle room, the government?
No. What they've said is that as far as the EIDL is concerned, it's the $10,000 grant portion, because EIDL has no forgiveness provisions.
But with the main loan, it's just that that 10 grand up front.
Right, because the 10 grand is considered a grant.
Okay.
Grants by definition means free money. It doesn't mean forgiveness.
Right.
So that's why they're calling that portion a grant. Okay, it's a grant to work as an advance against the loan. PPP does have loan forgiveness, and the loan forgiveness comes in the form of those payroll costs, the interest on mortgage, the rent and utility payments that is spent during that 8-week period.
Okay. 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 Lynn, phenomenal. Great job. I know I was throwing a lot at you there, and appreciate that. So for those of you who are on, you have more questions, look for your email as a follow-up. You can book something with us for kind of further input and kind of find out what we're doing, big picture, and really appreciate everyone being on. I know, a tough time for everyone. So thank you. Thanks again, Lynn. Thanks, Craig, for monitoring.
Everybody be safe.